Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. My name is Aysswarya Murthi. I'm the General Counsel of Tekion, and we have an all-star panel with us today to talk about fun stuff like data management, information security, and privacy. With us today, we have George Koumbis. We're very, very fortunate to have him with us. He is the General Counsel of Penske Motor Group. We're very, very fortunate to have them as our partner on this journey. George has had a long and illustrious career in the automotive industry, advising a lot of dealerships, regulatory agencies on automotive legal and regulatory issues. Prior to being with Penske Motor Group, George was with Aaron Fox, a leading firm in the transportation and automotive space. Next up is Ved Surtani, who is our VP of Engineering at Tekion, the wizard behind the platform and the architecture that enables us to do what we do. Ved's experience lies in building scalable platforms and architecture that enable us to be agile and move as quickly as our customers need. And finally, we have with us Deepak Singh, Associate General Counsel and Data Privacy Officer at Tekion. Deepak is responsible for building all our privacy by design initiatives and making sure that we launch industry-leading, secure, and compliant products. Prior to being with Tekion, Deepak was leading the GDPR efforts at Kraft Heinz, and his experience with the GDPR regulatory regime crucially informs his perspective on data management, privacy, and information security. So without further ado, let's get right into it. As we all know, dealerships have had to navigate some fairly interesting times in the last few years with the pandemic, inventory shortages, supply chain crisis. In addition to that, dealerships have had to adapt and constantly evolve to keep pace with changing consumer demands, the need for personalization, and the rapid move towards digitization. With all of these changes, our regulators have been busy too. In the last few years, we've seen a number of new regulations and legislative developments that target every aspect of a dealership's operations, as well as how a car is sold or serviced. We've seen changes that, like the upcoming FTC rule on disclosures and UDAP, right? We've seen the California privacy regime that just went into effect called CPRA, and there is the upcoming GLBA safeguards rule as well. So a lot of things to sort of navigate and adapt to. With this in mind, George, I want to bring you in and talk about what it feels like to be a dealer today. We've seen a rapid expansion of both the scope and the reach of regulatory requirements. And there is an increasing load on dealerships to do a number of things and function effectively like a technology company. How does it feel like to be a dealer today? And what are the investments that dealers need to make to stay compliant and thrive?
Well, first, it's really great to be with you guys. It feels good to sit here with you. It's been a long journey for us all. Going from the outside in, I'd say I have a strong conviction that dealerships are going to lead the way to the new era of vehicle ownership. They will coexist and compete with other players that they might not be used to competing with. That includes OEMs that sell direct and digital online used vehicle players. They're going to compete with one another in new ways over longer distances. So the monopoly that the local dealer once had over customers in their geographic location is probably gone. With that in mind, we see that technology and customer experience is going to be the key to how effectively dealers can thrive and compete. So building a digital experience that starts with targeting and discovery and ends with a delivery that is seamless and easy and all comes together is going to be a vital requirement to stay competitive in the future. I'd say that customer experience is an expertise of dealers, but the regulatory direction is also going to call for broadened knowledge and experience in technology and the legal requirements associated with technology, which is I think where we're at today and is so important. So broadly speaking, we've seen dealers prepare in several ways. First and foremost, you have to create a formal compliance program. I mean, that's a requirement of the new federal rule anyway. So if you haven't done it, you need to, and that's your framework for how you're going to operate. Secondly is the outsourcing of technology operations. That's been vital from an efficiency perspective and to help manage the regulatory landscape. We need to broaden our skills in technology and the legal requirements associated with technology. And I think overall, a heightened awareness of data management practices, the awareness of data management practices, privacy compliance, information security, both from a business operations perspective and a regulatory compliance perspective.
Thank you, George. Very interesting insights. What do you think is driving the regulatory focus on the automotive industry, which so far I think has managed to be treated differently? In my experience, what we are seeing, and we'll bring in our technologists and our legal experts in a little bit, but quantum leaps in terms of technology and the ability to harvest data at scale and, data breach incidents that we've seen in other industries, I think have created maybe an intense focus on what dealerships are doing. The amount of data that they have access to might be driving some of the direction that we're seeing, but what are your perspectives on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's really it. And now being on the inside and working closely with our company and seeing how much data we process and manage, and it's compiled like year over year, it's just a tremendous amount of information. And, one of the new safeguards rules relates to how long you can actually keep that data if you don't have a legitimate business purpose for it. And as you said, we've seen a few incidents within the industry of breaches. And I mean, automotive has always been the driving force especially in the USA and internationally. And so you have these worlds that are colliding together. And I think that, the regulators see that and they want to make sure they get a hold of it and understand it. So I think they're trying to catch up to the technology and the moves that the dealerships are making. And that's what brings us here today.
Absolutely. I want to pick up on one of the points that you made, which is that technology and customer experience are going to be key tools for how a dealership is able to effectively compete, not just compete, but thrive today. And I want to bring in Ved, our technologist, to talk about the role that technology has in driving that change in automotive retail. Why is technology such a key driver? Why is it a force multiplier? What does being on the cloud mean? And tell us about the trends you're seeing.
Thanks, Aysswarya. The customers today, they are seeking more and more personalized experience, and not just personalized, they're looking at uniform experience. If they go to buy a phone in an Apple store or they are shopping online, they expect the same experience now when they are buying a car. And if you look back a few years during the pandemic years, the innovation has picked up pace even more. And to just keep up with that pace, the adoption of modern technologies will become key. Dealers who want to understand customers and what they want, and if they want to keep up with that, it will become increasingly difficult to manage that and adapt quickly if they continue to use the older technologies. So this is where the cloud technologies and cloud-based platforms come in, because they give you the agility. If there's a regulatory change, for example, or if there's a new innovation you have done, and if you want those things in your system and to be able to offer that to customers, it takes a long time if you are on a traditional technology. But if you are on a cloud-based solution, you wake up in the morning and your system refreshes and you got all the new features, right? So agility is going to be the key to continue and adapt to changing customer needs. Then it comes to cost. The cloud-based solutions, because they are very flexible in scalability, you can add more compute at will and in real time. And what that does is that, the vendors, they can, offer solutions like big data and, AI at the fraction of a cost. And it enables us to give them those solutions in pay-as-you-go model. So then dealers can, they don't have to fear about getting logged in when they don't know about whether it is for them or not. They can freely experiment with things, tweak their business processes, and especially in this time when everyone is trying to figure out, what's going to be the next few years going to look like. So it's even more key that they get the agility and the cost flexibility to freedom to actually go and try out things, and it's going to be a main differentiator. If we talk about big data and analytics and AI, if you look at some of the other industries, especially in retail, and if you look at Amazon or Apple, a lot of credit of their massive success can go to the ways in which they are utilizing their data. Whatever they do today, they are using AI, and it's at the heart of everything, right? They are using it for pricing the products. They now have a better understanding of their customers, so they use it to their advantage, right? Every search that a customer makes is powered by AI behind the scene, right? So it gives them a significant advantage, and the same trend is coming into automotive, and we'll see that increasingly adoption of these technologies will not only give big advantages to dealers who are adopting it. In future, if you are not adopting this, it can even become a survival problem. And if you look back just about 10 years back, the phone industry saw similar things where companies who failed to understand what customers want almost vanished, and some of them actually vanished.
Very interesting thoughts, Ved. So I think what you're saying is differentiated experiences that are so uniquely personalized to each customer are going to be key to how a dealership can survive and thrive today. Obviously, all of those differentiated experiences and that personalization relies on vast amounts of data. And data management then becomes very, very key to how a dealership operates. And it's the compliance framework that it builds. Data management and privacy go hand in hand. And I want to bring in Deepak, who's got years and years of experience across the world with different privacy regimes, on the trends that you're seeing in privacy and data management worldwide, and how you think those trends are going to manifest here in the United States and in automotive as well.
Yeah, thanks, Aysswarya. I think that's a really good question. As a data privacy professional, I would be remiss not to mention that happy International Data Privacy Day, which is a new phenomenon. And I think it ties back into kind of what the three panelists have been talking about, because in the past few years, you're seeing this really push towards data privacy. And to understand kind of where we're going in terms of privacy, I think we need to understand why we're even here. One of the things that I thought was most interesting about even walking around the exhibit halls is almost every single booth tells you about how they're going to use data and analytics or consumer targeting to help you do your business better. And at a grand scale, that's a good thing, right? Because as a consumer myself, I want to see advertising isn't going away. So I want to see advertising that's relevant to me, things that are actually useful for me and my family, and things I actually want to buy. So there's that. But then on the flip side, you have some of the backlash that has come up from companies like Meta, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, who have collected just vast amounts of data beyond what is necessary to provide a customized service to an individual user. And oftentimes as a consumer, you might feel like, hey, at least, if I'm handing over my data for this particular dealership or this particular service, at least I know what I'm getting in return. I'm getting a better experience. I'm getting a better service. I'm getting something out of that. Whereas when you have sort of broad data collection, you don't necessarily know where your data is going. You don't know what it's being used for and who it's being shared with. And so I think consumers have gone from feeling like, data and analytics can give you a consumer experience that's tailored to them, to more feeling like, oh, this is surveillance. I'm feeling like, everybody has every information about me and I don't know where it is. And so regulators are responding to that. And I think regulators in Europe already have with GDPR. You have a very comprehensive privacy regime there, and consumers have responded favorably to that. And as a result, companies have as well. So companies are a lot more open and transparent about how they're collecting data, what they're using it for. And likewise, consumers also have more rights and control over their data. Secondly, I think this mass collection of data has also kind of created security risks. And Ved kind of touched upon this, and George as well. But just in the last 2 years, T-Mobile, for example, had 2 separate data breaches, one of 75 million users, and then just this past year, one of 35 million users. So collectively, that's 110 million users whose data was breached and included things like credit card information, social security numbers. And so from a regulator perspective, just the vast amount of data that's being collected is also creating a risk for those companies who are not properly securing it and don't have the ability to properly control the data and make sure it's secured in a way that's really going to protect the consumer. And so where I think this is all ultimately leading to, very briefly, last year we had potentially a federal privacy law that was on the books. It had made it out of the House and was put up to the Senate. For various political reasons, it has been shelved. And so I think we're going to start seeing states just move forward with their own privacy legislation. So as Aysswarya mentioned, CCPA, CPRA went into effect on Jan 1. You also have various other privacy laws that were passed in the past year with Utah and Connecticut. Virginia is going into effect as well. And at the end of the day, that's not really a good thing for business or consumers, because the rights of a consumer are going to change from state to state to state. And so, and as a business, that gets hard to respond to, right? Because if you're a dealership and you have customers in multiple states, and as George mentioned, you're doing business with customers across multiple states, how do you harmonize the fact that some of your customers have certain rights and others don't? And so that's, I think, where it ends up being more reliant on a tool that can help you kind of identify and really better address those differing needs. So I think in the grand scheme of things, we're going to see definitely a lot more enforcement actions this year and probably in the coming years, probably more at the state level, but also the FTC, as we all know, is going to be more and more active and more involved. And it's really going to kind of create sort of a division in terms of how each state is responding until we get some sort of uniform legislation at the federal level.
So I think it's fair to say data is the new oil. It determines how we do things, how we compete, how we thrive today. But obviously, with harnessing huge amounts of data also brings a certain level of risk, which I'm sure, George, keeps you up at night. What are the things that keep you up at night? What are you doing to address them?
What we talked about before about the landscape is changing constantly, and dealers need to stay on top of that. And there's a tremendous overhead associated with that. We talked about enhancing data management practice awareness, both from a regulatory compliance and business operations. So when you look at that, the core item is the risk dealers face when outsourcing to third-party vendors, particularly those that are managing technology and data. I think that's the core issue that we face. After that is the need for tools to either reduce or eliminate altogether that day-to-day compliance burden. And lastly, is identifying those high-risk areas within the business and developing and implementing a plan to address them. Those would be, I think, the most important things that I'm looking at.
You're absolutely right, George, because we are, as we know, in an era of economic uncertainty at this point. And the regulatory load on dealerships almost seems to justify having a full-scale in-house team of attorneys, information technology specialists, security experts to sort of help you stay compliant and keep pace with what's happening. There are obviously a number of point solutions, each of which does different things, none of which speak to each other. But I think the solution really is in finding a partner that builds in all of those things where compliance, security, privacy are thought of as part of the product development effort. Privacy by design is built in. And Deepak, to address the point that you were making about the sort of patchwork legislation that we see across the country, no uniform legislation on data privacy, whether we like it or not, that's what consumers expect today. And a tool that, to help dealerships stay compliant, you need a tool that builds all of that in rather than having to look elsewhere. Ved, I want to bring you in here. From a security perspective, what are the best practices and tips you would provide the automotive industry, dealers in particular, to stay compliant? What are practical things they can do on a day-to-day basis?
So I would say that technology is your best friend here. Most of the modern cloud-based applications already have many of these functionalities baked into them, and you can use them and configure them to stay compliant. Some of the advanced solutions like Tekion will provide, more solutions which are more configurable to your needs because the compliances are different in different states. So it's not necessary that you go about implementing all of those security features everywhere. It depends on what is needed for you to be compliant. For example, MFA, it's a standard across all cloud-based applications these days, right? Advanced solutions can give you more functionalities like, who can access the data, where they can access from, prepare a geofencing around your dealership so that nobody gets to get access to data outside of your dealership. The customers are expecting, and your users need to be more mobile. They want to access things from mobile apps and tablets to be more efficient. Customers want to access their data from the apps, and that means data is not in your servers anymore, right? It's moving, and to be compliant, you may have to implement things like MFA and kind of encryption at rest and encryption in transit. All of these things are available by default in cloud. The easiest way to say compliant, I would say, is to adopt these technologies and adopt cloud-based solutions. In addition to it, most of the modern applications, they also have to follow very strict compliance and security checks in applications. Tekion, for example, does a security testing on a continuous basis. Every time we send a change, it goes through security testing. But given the amount of time it takes, it can slow down innovation as well, because you can't build fast enough if you have to do 5 other things, right? Once again, their cloud applications and the adoption of cloud technologies comes to rescue, because using some of those technologies, we are able to not only innovate faster, but also stay secure.
That's a very interesting point you made, Ved, which is that all of this is sort of built by design into the cloud architecture itself. And I think as an attorney, and having seen, and Deepak, please chime in here, but in a data breach defense, you're really sort of evaluated on a negligence theory, right? What are the things that you did in order to prevent this from happening, and were you negligent in doing certain things? And when you talk about technologies like the cloud, where things like penetration testing, MFA, etc., are all built in, and they are layers of defense, it definitely strengthens your defense when you're talking about a data breach, where you're essentially able to say, look, I did all of these things, and yet this happened. It's not to say the cloud is infallible, but it certainly gives you a much more strengthened and robust defense in the event of a data breach. Deepak, maybe weigh in here.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, on some level, I think any good business is going to have to prepare for an inevitable data breach. And hopefully it never happens, but you do have to kind of think of, okay, now if it happens, how are we going to respond? How are we going to make sure that we have a defensible position to show that we did everything we possibly could in order to prevent the breach? Now, even before you get to that point, though, I think the advantages a cloud system gives you is it allows you to even avoid and minimize the risk of a breach in the first place, right? So going back to some of what we were talking about in the beginning, if you're sitting on massive amounts of data on your servers within your dealership, that is a centralized area for you to potentially have a risk or a breach, or somebody, and a breach can be something as simple as somebody in your dealership sends out the wrong information to the wrong customer. So that's not a bad actor coming in, that's just a mistake. So I think kind of putting that in context, you realize it really requires understanding the tools you're using and making sure that those tools have the right security measures, that they are implementing the right things in order to keep your data safe. Because at the end of the day, as a dealer, you are responsible for your vendors. And so if they're not able to provide the right kind of level of control and protection, that also falls on you ultimately. And I think along those lines, there's a few things that, even putting aside the technology piece, I think there's a few things dealers can just take as simple steps of making sure that they are compliant with various laws that are coming into effect and are in effect. One of those is probably just updating your privacy notice. It sounds really simple. It sounds really silly. It feels like no one actually reads these things. But in all honesty, that is your way of telling your customer how you're collecting their information, what you're doing with it, and who has access to it. And one of the things I think kind of, if you're not a lawyer, one of the things that can kind of stress you out about a privacy notice is, oh, it sounds so legalese. Like there's so much stuff that I don't know where to even begin. But if you really break it down, you just think about it, what do you want to see? It's just basic questions of who, what, where, when, why. And say that, right? So your customers will appreciate it because it's easy to understand. They'll be able to understand what you're doing, and they'll take you as a more of a transparent partner. Additionally, I think another maybe best practice that dealers can take is frankly data minimization. So we talk a lot about how tons and tons of data is needed in order to run various analytics. But on a business level, as a dealership or as a vendor to a dealership, more often than not, you don't need all of that data. What you really need is data quality. And so if you start paring down the information to what you actually need and putting in place a retention plan, purge information after a certain number of years, because frankly, it's probably not that valuable to you anymore. So you're reducing your risk, you're clearing out information that you no longer need, but also actually keeping the actionable information that you actually might end up needing in your business. And then I think the third thing is just probably transparency, right? So transparency kind of comes in a number of ways. It comes within how you interact with your customers in the dealership, but also on a technology level, making sure that the technologies you're using are transparent with your customers. So if you're relying on a DMS provider, making sure that DMS provider has the tools necessary to allow you to present privacy notices or the right disclosures that you want to make to your customers. That also includes, being able to action data privacy rights. So if somebody makes a deletion request, being able to action that. So all of those kind of build into transparency, and that's partly technology, that's partly just best practices within your dealership.
Thank you. George, Deepak, you both talked about how dealerships are essentially relying on their vendors to help them stay compliant. Maybe it's time to talk about some of the ways in which we at Tekion are enabling that and some of the product features that we have coming along. So let's show it.
Yeah, happy to do that. So I think I'd left off with this concept of transparency. And so one of the things we are doing at Tekion is we are launching what we're calling the Trust Portal. I mentioned that as a dealer, you can only be as transparent as your providers and your vendors are with you. And so what we're trying to do is put on our website all the information that you would need in order to run your compliance business. So from a dealership perspective, we have a secured portal to download our SOC reports. So when your auditors come in and say, hey, what is Tekion doing? How are they securing data? It's available right here for you. You can download it yourself. It's self-accessible. Additionally, we have our data processing addendum, which is an agreement between us and you, our customer, in terms of how we will secure your information and the limitations we're going to put in terms of how we use it. So again, another way of being transparent about how your data is being used and stored, which you can then pass on to your compliance and your customers as well. In addition to that, we'll have information like frequently asked questions. So how do we help you comply with CCPA, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of all part of this idea of being transparent, because then that enables our customers to be transparent and get the better relationship out of their end users. We also have tools built in, and I think George and Ved had both referenced this, GLBA compliance, right? So it's easy to build on and add on additional vendors that will help you with different pieces of compliance. But at the end of the day, what you really need is you need a tool that's really built into the system you're using. And so for us, we've built in various ways to be compliant with GLBA, providing annual privacy notices to your customers. We make that as easy as possible in the dashboard. We also have automated responses and emails that you can customize to your individual dealership, but it will go out with acknowledgments. For example, if somebody makes a data request to opt out, you can provide that easily to them. And so it's all part of just making it a one-stop shop and as easy as possible for all of our customers. In addition, we have a dashboard for DLBA that allows you to see for each customer request, so for an opt-out, who's asked for an opt-out, what is the status. It helps you track all of that, so nothing's getting slipped, nothing's being missed. And it helps you just stay compliant within the parameters of what you're required to do. We also have a CCPA, CCPRA, VDPA, all the various acronyms of state privacy laws out there. But in fact, this is a dashboard that allows you to action data requests. So if somebody asks for their information to no longer be sold, it's all within the platform. If somebody wants their information deleted, it's within the platform. And the great thing is, it doesn't matter if you're a dealership in Utah or a dealership in New Mexico or California, or a state where none of these privacy laws actually exist. If you want to be transparent, this feature is enabled for you. So if you want to delete someone's information and they make that request, even if legally you don't have to, you always have the option within our platform to do that. And so again, it's just another tool to help dealers kind of help make their customers happy and meet that end result. And so as you can see, these are some example screens of how a request would be marked as verified. And if somebody wants to correct their data, same thing. It's easy to go into the system, go into their profile, and just correct the information right there. And then, as Ved mentioned, the last thing I want to just touch upon amongst the various features is auto logout. And that's just a security feature to allow you to keep your data, your users secure by automatically logging them out after 20 minutes of inactivity. It seems simple, but it keeps information secure and kind of really helps keep ultimately avoiding any data breaches. So hopefully this kind of gives everybody a little bit of a sense and flavor of what's within the platform. And we're not stopping here. There's definitely going to be new things that we're going to be developing and evolving. So this is just one step of that full process.
Yeah, if you ever thought lawyers couldn't be innovative, here's your answer. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thank you, George, Ved, and Deepak, for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you.
Thank you all.